Chapter 1. Coming home broken. Elena stepped off the bus with a single suitcase and the uneasy awareness that nothing in her life fit the way it used to. The wheels hissed against the pavement as the bus pulled away and left her standing alone. In the late afternoon heat, for a long moment Elena did not move. She looked down the street as if she expected her old life to come walking toward her in apology and explanation. Instead she saw the same quiet road she remembered from childhood, lined with tired trees and houses that carried their own long histories. The air smelled of sun-warmed grass and distant water from the river bend. It was a scent that once made her feel safe. Now it only deepened the tightness in her chest. Her phone remained dark inside her pocket. No new messages. No final attempt from the man she once believed would share her future. He had chosen someone else in a voice that had tried to sound gentle. That conversation still rang in her head. It mingled with the polite but empty rejections from the company she had hoped to work for. They praised her talent, but said she lacked something they could not define. She carried that judgment like a bruise no one could see. Coming home was not a triumphant return. It was surrender. Elena walked toward town with slow steps. Each storefront reminded her of another version of herself. The bakery still painted, bright shapes in its windows and sent sweet smells into the street. The old post office displayed faded notices in the glass. A clothing shop had changed hands, but still arranged dresses on mannequins, whose blank faces stared at nothing. Elena kept her eyes straight. If she looked too long, she feared she might see a memory she could not stomach. She did not stop until Maple Lane opened in front of her. It was narrower than she remembered. She used to ride her bike down this road with her grandmother cheering from the porch. Now the house waited like a forgotten keepsake. The porch boards sagged at the center. The railing leaned away from the steps. Dust filmed every window. Elena paused at the gate and lifted her hand to the wood. The paint flaked instantly. The small pieces drifted to the ground. Her grandmother had been gone for almost 2 years. Elena had not returned even once since the funeral. Unlocking the door took effort. The key stuck. The metal scraped against rust. When the lock finally clicked free, Elena pushed the door open and stood in a hallway that felt smaller and dimmer than she remembered. Heavy curtains blocked the sun. Dust hung in slow suspended motion. The house smelled of old paper and shut. In air, Elena set her suitcase on the closest surface and felt her throat tighten. She told herself she would cry later. She did not want tears to be her first act in this place. She moved through the rooms and tried to judge what could be saved. The wallpaper peeled, the floors creaked. The kitchen faucet dripped with steady rhythm. It would take time and money. Both things Elena did not have. A knock at the front door startled her. She opened it to find Mrs. Dawson from next door, who still wore her hair in an elaborate twist. The older woman hugged Elena without asking permission. Elena stood stiff, then allowed the touch. Mrs. Dawson asked kind questions that Elena could not fully answer. She mentioned that a local carpenter could inspect the place tomorrow if Elena wished. Elena said yes, though she did not care about anything except lying down and forgetting she existed. After Mrs. Dawson left, the house resumed its silence. Elena sat on the floor of the living room and stared at the wall until evening shadows pressed around her. She did not bother with dinner. Exhaustion made her limbs heavy and thought felt like punishment. Morning arrived with light forcing its way around the curtains. Elena dragged herself up and washed her face in cold water. She changed into jeans and an old sweater, then opened windows to chase the stale smell away. When the knock sounded, she felt an immediate irritation. She was not ready for anyone. Still, she opened the door. Noah Hale stood on the porch, with a tool belt slung over one shoulder, and a quiet expression. He was taller than she expected. His hair fell across his forehead in a careless way that suggested work came before vanity. He offered a greeting that sounded calm and patient. Elena responded with the bare minimum. He stepped inside only when she waved him through. He did not comment on the dust or the sagging ceiling. He simply looked around with an assessing gaze and nodded to himself. Elena followed him through the rooms but maintained distance. She watched him run his hand along the door frame and tap at the baseboards. He knelt to check a section of warped floor. His motions were deliberate. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. Elena found herself irritated again because his comment settled her. She wanted someone to match her frustration so she did not feel so exposed. But Noah said only that the house needed work. His voice carried neither judgment nor pity. When he asked how much she wanted to do immediately, Elena shrugged. She tried to sound casual, but her voice wavered. She did not want him to hear her uncertainty. Noah made a few notes in a small-lined notebook that he pulled from his back pocket. He asked a few practical questions. Where did she plan to stay while repairs were made? Did she have a timeline? Did she want full restoration or functional improvements? Elena answered vaguely. Noah did not push Dot. As they returned to the living room, he paused and looked at her with an unreadable expression. Not invasive, not curious in a way that sought gossip, simply noticing. Elena hated and appreciated that in equal measure. She crossed her arms and mentioned that she would figure things out. Noah nodded with acceptance that did not diminish her. He gathered his measurements and said he would return with a plan in a few days. Elena walked him out and stood on the porch as he left. She felt a strange heat in her cheeks. She told herself it was embarrassment or annoyance. She did not want a stranger to sense how hollow she felt. She watched him reach his truck and climb in with easy movement. He drove away without any lingering look. Elena exhaled and felt her shoulders slump. When she went back inside, she closed the door and leaned her head against it. She admitted quietly to the empty house that she was afraid. Afraid of rebuilding a place. Afraid of rebuilding her life. Afraid that nothing could be repaired. Afraid that Noah Hale had glimpsed the fear she worked so hard to hide. She drew a long breath and pushed away from the door. There was cleaning to do. There was grief to ignore. And for now she would live in the space between both. Chapter to the quiet Carpenter returned 2 days later with the same unhurried stride and the same calm air that unsettled Elena because she did not tell whether he saw her or simply saw a job to be completed. She had spent the morning scrubbing the kitchen until her arms trembled. She wanted the house to look less like a grave. She wanted him to walk into something that did not reek of her failure. When she heard his truck roll to a stop outside, she straightened her shirt and told herself that his presence meant nothing. He was here to inspect a house. That was all. He stepped through the doorway after she called out for him to enter. He held rolled papers in one hand. Elena assumed they were estimates. His shirt was the same soft blue he had worn before, and a leather belt held several tools that clinked softly as he moved. He stood in the center of the living room and unfolded the papers across a dusty table without asking for permission. Only then did he look up at her and offer a quiet good morning. She returned the greeting with a thin voice that did not sound like her own. He began explaining structural issues in simple language. The porch needed reinforcement. The roof line sagged. In the back, there was probable water damage under the sink. Elena listened, but her mind drifted. He spoke with measured certainty. He seemed to trust that problems could be fixed if time and patience were applied. Elena did not understand that kind of faith. She kept waiting for him to mention cost. When he finally did, his tone remained steady. He suggested essential repairs first. He did not push for extravagance. Elena asked whether she could do anything herself. She expected him to discourage her. Instead he nodded and said she could help with clearing debris and sanding surfaces if she wanted to reduce hours. His answer disarmed her. She had imagined he would guard his work or treat her like someone who would break things. Instead, he offered a chance to learn. The idea unsettled her. She had come home to hide. She had not come home to participate in anything. While he spoke, his eyes drifted occasionally toward her face, but never held her long enough to feel intrusive. He looked at her the way someone looks at a window to check for cracks, rather than to admire what is behind it. She wondered what he thought. Did she appear lost? Did she appear weak? She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and tried to look composed. She noticed a faint scar on his forearm and the rough calluses on his hands. He was someone shaped by work, someone who rebuilt things, someone her life did not prepare her to understand. He asked if she wanted to walk through the rest of the house again, before finalizing plans. She agreed because she could not think of a reason to refuse. In the hallway, he paused by a framed photograph left on the wall. It was of Eleanor at age 12 sitting on the porch steps with her grandmother. Noah glanced at it for only a second, then kept moving. He did not comment. Eleanor felt relief at that. She did not want sentiment today. In the kitchen, he crouched to examine the pipes. Eleanor watched his shoulders rise and fall as he worked. There was something orderly in his movements. He spoke over his shoulder to tell her that he could tighten the connections, but they would need replacement within a year. His voice filled the small space without crowding it. Eleanor leaned against the counter and fought the urge to apologize for the state of everything. Noah did not ask for apologies. He only identified the next step. When they returned to the living room, he asked when she wanted to begin. There was no pressure in his tone, but the question felt heavy. Begin was a word Eleanor associated with hope, and she did not trust hope. Still, she agreed to start in the morning. Noah nodded, then rolled his plans neatly again. He said he would bring necessary tools and protective gloves if she wanted them. She murmured yes. Her throat tightened as she said it. Before leaving, he paused at the doorway. He looked at the porch steps and ran his thumb along the worn wood. Then he turned back to Eleanor with simple instruction. Do not walk on the far right step until he reinforced it tomorrow. The wood was soft from moisture. She thanked him. It was a small exchange, but her voice carried gratitude she had not expected. To fill. After he drove away, Eleanor stood on the porch and watched the dust settle. She pressed her arms around herself and tried to understand the strange stirring that lingered in her chest. Noah did not charm her. He did not flatter her. He did not try to pierce her silence. He simply existed in a way that disrupted the fog she carried. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her grandmother's old bedroom. She studied the cracks in the ceiling and listened to the creaks of the house. She pictured Noah kneeling at the sink. She pictured him marking wood with steady hands. She wondered how someone could move through life with such steadiness after loss or disappointment. She wondered if steadiness was something a person learned or something they were born with. Morning arrived too early. Eleanor dragged herself from bed and dressed in clothes she did not care about. She tied her hair back. She stepped into the hallway and stood in the quiet until she heard the familiar rumble of Noah's truck. Her stomach tightened. She did not know why she cared about his arrival. She opened the door before he could knock. He greeted her with a quiet nod and retrieved tools from the back of the truck. Eleanor watched him unload buckets and boards without complaint. He worked with a quiet efficiency that made her feel slower than she wished. When he asked if she ate breakfast, she blinked at him in confusion. She shook her head. He nodded as if that explained everything and handed her a bottle of water. Eleanor looked at the bottle in her hand. It was a small kindness, one that made her eyes sting unexpectedly. She took a breath and steadied herself. She would help today. She would move her hands. She would not think about the life she left behind. Noah gestured toward the porch as their first task. Eleanor followed, even though fear pressed against her ribs. She knew nothing about repair. She knew nothing about starting over. Yet there she was at the edge of her grandmother's porch beside a man who believed in foundations and reinforcement. Noah passed her a pair of gloves. Eleanor slid them on. The material felt stiff and unfamiliar. Noah said nothing more. He simply began to work. Eleanor joined him with slow and sure effort. Beneath her uncertainty something shifted. something almost like a breath taken after a long time underwater. Chapter 3: Rebuilding Walls. Tearing down fear. The third morning, the gloves no longer felt like foreign armor on Eleanor's hands. She still fumbled, but she showed up, and that small act carried its own weight. Noah arrived early again with a thermos of coffee and an extra mug, which he set on the porch rail without announcement. Eleanor noticed the gesture but pretended she did not. She would not give him the satisfaction of gratitude. Still, she poured herself a small amount when he turned away. The warmth steadied her. Today they worked inside. Noah began clearing the spare room first, because the walls there sagged and buckled from years of moisture. Eleanor stared at the cracked plaster and wondered if houses could collapse the way hearts did when pressure became unbearable. Noah handed her a scraper and demonstrated how to loosen the old wallpaper. His motions were slow and deliberate. Eleanor mirrored them, but her movements were short and tense. She felt his eyes on her occasionally, not judging, not even questioning, simply watching to be sure she did not injure herself. That awareness irritated her because it made her want to perform competence. She dug the scraper beneath the paper with too much force. The metal slipped and scraped her knuckle. Blood welled in a thin bright line. Eleanor hissed and shook her hand. Noah crossed the room without rushing and retrieved a small first aid kit from his bag. He cleaned the cut with gentle pressure. Eleanor kept her gaze on the wall to avoid the heat of embarrassment. He wrapped the finger in gauze and tape, then stepped back with no commentary. She expected criticism or a joke. The silence felt strangely respectful. They worked again. Eleanor slowed her pace. The wallpaper peeled away in long strips. The sound of tearing seemed louder than their breathing. Dust stirred. Light filtered through the window in muted gold. Eleanor concentrated on the repetitive motion until her shoulders loosened. When Noah spoke, his voice came without warning. He told her she did not need to force every step. Wood and plaster responded better to patience than to panic. Eleanor paused and swallowed against the sting of truth. He was not speaking only about the house. She ignored the implication and changed the subject by asking how long he had been doing this work. Noah answered simply that he began in high school. He had liked restoring things that others threw away. He did not elaborate. He returned to the wall. Their silence resumed, but it felt less sharp. Eleanor found her breathing syncing with the rhythm of scraping. She thought of her ex. She thought of the job interview where she sat across from people who evaluated her like a flawed product. The memory tightened her stomach. The fear of being worthless crept into her thoughts until her hands lost their steady motion. Noah noticed the sudden hesitation and asked if she wanted a break. Eleanor shook her head and forced her attention back to the task. Noah stepped away to cut new boards for reinforcement. Eleanor listened to the sound of his saw from the hallway. He worked with a focus that calmed the house. She walked into the kitchen to fetch water and steadied herself against the counter. She wondered how long she could pretend she was fine. She wondered if she should tell Noah to stop looking at her like someone capable of rebuilding anything. When she returned to the room, Noah was fitting a board into place. He explained the new support beam in plain terms. His voice created structure where Eleanor felt only disorder. He asked her to hold a bracket while he secured it. She stepped close enough to feel the presence of his body, but not enough to touch. Her pulse jumped at the nearness. She gripped the metal and watched him work. His forearm brushed her wrist accidentally. Heat rose to her throat. Noah did not react. He kept tightening the screws. When they finished the first wall, Noah told her she did well. Eleanor nearly laughed, because praise felt like a language she no longer spoke. Instead, she nodded and removed her gloves. Her palms were slick with sweat. She wiped them on her jeans and murmured that anyone could have done the same. Noah disagreed softly. Showing up mattered more than talent. The sentence hung between them. Eleanor stepped away to avoid its weight. They moved to the next room where boxes of her grandmother's old belongings lined the floor. Elena froze at the sight of her grandmother's handwriting on a cardboard lid. The neat loops brought memories rushing back. Noah noticed her stillness and asked if she wanted him to clear the boxes out first. Elena shook her head, but she did not move. Tears burned behind her eyes. Noah did not comment. He did not ask a question. He simply waited without crowding her. After a minute, Elena crouched and opened one box. A folded shawl lay inside. She lifted the fabric and held it against her face. The scent of lavender clung to it. A wave of grief rolled through her. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose until the emotion settled. When she looked up, Noah had already turned back to the wall to give her privacy. Her gratitude was sharp and uncomfortable. Someone noticing her pain, without demanding she perform it, was unfamiliar. Noah asked if she wanted to start sanding the wood trim. He demonstrated with a smooth motion. Elena imitated him. Dust rose in fine clouds. She slowly let her shoulders relax again. The rhythm became something like breathing. She realized she had not thought of her axe in several minutes. The absence startled her. Repair required attention. It pulled her focus away from self-punishment. By late afternoon they had removed most of the damaged wallpaper and reinforced a section of weakened wall. Elena felt drained but less hollow. Noah packed up his tools with quiet efficiency. Before leaving, he said he would return tomorrow to continue sanding and begin patchwork. Elena nodded and thanked him. The words came easier this time. When he stepped outside, Elena followed him onto the porch. She watched him pull his cap lower over his brow. She asked without thinking whether he ever grew tired of fixing broken places. Noah paused as if considering an honest answer. Then he said that everything wears down eventually. The important part was choosing what is worth repairing. He met her eyes with a brief steady look that unsettled her. Then he wished her a good evening and headed for his truck. Elena remained on the porch while the sky shifted toward dusk. She thought about the wall they had rebuilt. She thought about his quiet observation. She looked down at her bandaged finger. She felt a strange flicker of possibility. The house was still a wreck. Her life was still uncertain, yet she had helped with something today. Something changed because she used her hands. Something stayed upright because she steadied it. For the first time in weeks her breaths came easier. She leaned against the porch post and let the air move through her lungs without resistance. Maybe tomorrow she would not hide in the hallway. Maybe tomorrow she would keep showing up. Chapter 4. The past does not stay buried. Elena woke before her alarm the next morning. Not because she felt rested, but because something in her chest pushed her awake. The house was still dim and quiet, smelling faintly of sawdust from yesterday's sanding. She lay there for a moment staring at the ceiling, remembering the way Noah had stood beside her. The way he had spoken softly about choosing what was worth repairing. She did not know why that sentence followed her into her dreams, but it did. She rose, washed her face, and braided her hair with unsteady fingers. Today felt heavier, though she could not explain why. By the time Noah's truck rumbled up the driveway, she was already on the porch waiting. She greeted him with a nod that felt more natural than the ones before. Noah gave a slight nod back, his expression as calm and unreadable as always. He carried a coil of cords in one hand and a toolbox in the other. There was something grounding about his presence, as if he brought order into the space simply by stepping into it. Elena wished she could borrow even a fraction of that steadiness inside. Noah set up tools in the spare room they had begun clearing. He checked their progress from the day before with a slow, meticulous look, then told her they would patch the damaged sections of the wall before sanding the next room. Elena nodded and slipped on her gloves, but as she reached for the sanding block, her phone buzzed from the pocket of her jeans. The sound hit her like a nerve struck wrong. She hesitated, then stepped into the hallway to check it. Her breath stopped when she saw the name. Her ex, a simple message. Just 2 words. Can we talk? Her vision blurred for a moment as every memory she had tried to bury clawed up through her chest. The humiliation of being replaced, the shock of hearing him confess he was already seeing someone else, the feeling of her career imploding at the same time. She turned the phone face down on the whole table and pressed both hands to her face. She did not want to cry. She did not want Noah to hear. She did not want to be dragged back into the version of herself she had fought to escape. Noah appeared in the doorway of the spare room, one hand braced against the frame. He glanced at the phone on the table, then at her pale face. He did not ask anything. His silence was a gentle question in itself. Elena inhaled shakily and tried to force her voice steady. It did not work. She muttered something vague about unwanted messages. Noah nodded once, not pressing, and returned to the room. That single act of restraint felt like more kindness than any comfort she had received in months. She followed him, grateful not to be interrogated. They worked in quiet. Noah mixed patching compound in a small bucket, while Elena steadied a board he had cut earlier. Her hands trembled faintly, and she hoped he would not notice. He noticed anyway. He always noticed. But he did not comment. He only adjusted the angle of the board, so she did not have to hold it so tightly. After a long stretch of silence, Noah spoke. His voice was quiet enough that she had to look up from her sanding to be sure she heard him. Right. He said that sometimes people break things in others because they are broken themselves. It was not an excuse, just an observation. Elena froze. Her throat tightened painfully. She felt seen in a way she was not prepared to face. She asked him how he knew. The question left her mouth before she could stop it. Noah continued smoothing the compound across the wall. He told her about the girlfriend he once planned to marry. He said her name softly, as if it still required careful handling. She had been sick 4 years. He stayed through hospital visits and false hopes and nights where machines echoed louder than breaths. He said losing her had felt like losing the future he had built in his mind. When she died, he did not touch his tools for months. He did not trust himself to build anything when the only thing he wanted back could not be repaired. Elena listened without speaking. She had not expected someone so reserved to carry such a quiet grief. She felt humbled that he shared even a piece of it with her. She whispered that she was sorry. Noah nodded, accepting the sentiment without letting it linger. He told her that love leaves marks even when it ends in the worst kind of silence. But the marks were proof that he once had something worth remembering. He said it not with sadness, but with quiet acceptance. Elena looked at him differently then. Not as a man who simply knew how to restore wood and plaster, but as someone who understood loss in a way she was only beginning to understand herself. The afternoon stretched into evening. As they worked, Eleanor's phone buzzed twice more. She ignored both. Each vibration felt like a tug toward the life that had wounded her. Each minute she kept her back turned to it felt like reclaiming something she had lost. At one point she dropped the sanding block and let out a shaky exhale. Noah set down his tool and met her eyes. He told her she did not have to respond. Not now. Not ever if she chose. Some doors did not need to be reopened. They only needed to be walked away from. The sentence settled inside her with unexpected comfort. They finished patching the walls. Noah packed his tools with unheard movements. Elena walked him to the porch. The sun was dipping low into warm orange light. She stepped aside to let him pass, but he paused at the top step, turning slightly toward her. He said she had done good work today. She almost laughed at the absurdity. She felt like an emotional storm barely contained, but Noah's tone was steady and sure. It made her believe him for a moment. He wished her a quiet evening and headed to his truck. Elena stood on the porch long after the engine faded down the road. She picked up her phone again. She looked at the unread messages. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then she turned the phone off and set it face down on the table inside. She finally understood something she had been avoiding. Pain demands attention, but healing asks for choice. and today she chose the side of herself that wanted to breathe again. Chapter 5. A house full of memories. Elena stood at the entrance of her grandmother's bedroom with painful aches on her shirt and dust clouding the air. The space felt frozen in time. The curtains were faded from years of sunlight, but still held the floral print her grandmother had carefully chosen decades ago. The scent of cedar and lavender lingered faintly, like a ghost of who lived here long before Elena packed her life into a car and fled back home. She gripped the doorway and felt her chest tighten, because this room was a reminder of everything she lost. It was her grandmother who always believed Elena would find happiness. Now the room waited for her to face that memory. Noah stepped in behind her with quiet footsteps. He carried a toolbox and a container of varnish, and he did not speak until he understood that silence mattered. He watched her swallow thick emotions and let her blink burning tears away. He simply waited. She finally nodded and gave herself permission to move inside. Noah set his supplies on a dresser and examined the cracked floorboards. He did not comment yet. He simply knelt down and touched the wood, as if introducing himself to her grandmother's past. The house had creaked and sagged in other places, but this room carried an emotional weight Elena had avoided since she moved back. She dusted off a corner shelf and found an old music box shaped like a bird. She wound it gently. The tune was slow and uneven from years of inactivity. The sound filled the room with soft melancholy. Eleanor's voice trembled as she said her grandmother played that box for her after nightmares. Noah looked up at her with calm eyes that did not pity her. He said a simple thank you for letting him hear it, because he understood that memories were fragile gifts. Elena sank to the floor beside the bedframe, hugging her knees. The bedframe was still sturdy, but the finish had peeled. Noah told her they could sand it down and restore it. She said she did not know if she wanted restoration, because restoring felt like pretending nothing had changed. Noah sat beside her. He said restoration is not erasing. It is honoring that something survived. Elena did not respond. Words felt too heavy. Noah stood again and started removing the rusted screws from the headboard. He guided her hand to hold a flashlight. He worked slowly so she could remain part of the task. Eleanor's breath steadied with the rhythm of his movements. She asked if he ever lost a place that held memories like this. His hands paused. He shared that, after his partner died, he could not enter their shared bedroom for months, because breathing inside it hurt. He said he stripped the walls one day out of anger, but kept one picture from their last vacation and placed it on new paint. He said it reminded him that grief does not own every corner of a life. Hearing this did not make Elena feel smaller. It made her feel understood. The tension in her shoulders eased, and she asked what he missed most about her. Noah said he missed how she hummed when she worked with wood. He said she would forget she was humming, and he loved that. Elena stared at him because he said it with steady affection, not dramatic sorrow. He spoke with a tone that accepted love and loss without collapsing. She admired that even though it made her chest ache, they continued working until the sun warmed the room. Dust floated in golden light. Elena sanded the bed frame, while Noah patched a crack near the window. Elena rubbed the sandpaper in careful strokes and felt the smoothness begin to return. It became a soothing motion. She did not need to speak. She only focused on the task and her breathing. Noah guided her when her pressure was uneven. His hand rested lightly on her wrist to correct the angle. There was no romantic charge, only presence and patience. Hours passed and Eleanor's body grew tired. She sat on the floor again and touched a quilt folded at the foot of the bed. She recognized the stitching. Her grandmother had taught her to sew crooked lines on that quilt when Elena was little. She traced the patterns until her vision blurred. Noah walked over and lowered himself beside her again. He did not ask questions. Tears slipped down her cheeks. They hit the quilt silently. Noah did not move to fix her grief. He let her feel it. Elena whispered that she felt she had failed her grandmother by coming home like a wreck. Noah shook his head. He told her that returning to a place of comfort is not failure. It is courage to seek what heals you. Elena pressed her forehead against the bed frame and cried harder. Noah stayed there with a presence so gentle it steadied her. His hand rested near her but not on her. It gave her space and support without pressure. When she finally lifted her face, she apologized. Noah said she owed no apology. He said emotion is not wrong. He said rooms like this one are meant for remembering. She laughed weakly, because she never imagined a Carpenter would be the one to speak truth she needed. She teased him about being unexpectedly wise. He smiled and said pain educates differently from books. They resumed work in quieter moments. Elena asked him to teach her how to apply varnish. He placed the brush in her hand and showed her their motion. She observed his ease and tried to match it. She felt grateful. She felt nervous. She felt more open than she had since she returned. Noah stood behind her, but did not crowd her. He gave instructions only when needed. The room looked brighter as layers of care replaced layers of neglect. Late afternoon drifted into early evening, and they stepped back to observe the progress. The floor looked cleaner. The bed frame glowed faintly with a promise of restoration. Elena sat back on her heels and said she wanted to finish this room for herself and for the memory of a woman who never stopped believing she deserved gentleness. Noah nodded. He said the room already seemed to breathe again. Elena looked at him and felt something new. It was not romantic desire. It was relief. Someone stayed. Someone listened without demand. Someone accepted tears without discomfort. Elena realized she had not experienced that in a very long time. Her ex would have filled the moment with plans and controls. Noah let life unfold without forcing. She stood and thanked him for staying through her breakdown. Noah corrected her gently. He said it was not a breakdown. It was remembering. He packed his tools and promised he would return tomorrow to continue. Elena walked him to the doorway. She said she hoped tomorrow would not feel so heavy. Noah said, "Heavy days mean the heart is working." Then he stepped outside, leaving Elena in the room that no longer felt like a mausoleum. It felt like a place she could reclaim piece by piece. Chapter 6. A different kind of touch. Morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen window and caught the dust motes that hung lazily in the air. Elena brewed coffee, while Noah unpacked a set of sanding blocks and small carving tools he had brought for the trim in her grandmother's study. He moved with quiet confidence, arranging each item as if it had a specific place in the day's rhythm. Elena watched for a moment, letting the aroma of the coffee settle her nerves. There was a warmth in the simple routines of the morning that felt almost like safety. She did not dare name it. Noah invited her to join him in the study. The walls were stripped bare, and the sunlight made the scratches in the wooden trim more visible than she had noticed before. He knelt and demonstrated how to sand in even strokes, pressing lightly on the grain of the wood. His hands moved slowly, deliberately. He handed her a block and Elena mimicked his movements, her own strokes tentative at first. The room filled with a soft rasping sound as they worked side by side. Elena realized she was laughing quietly at herself when the sanding caught unevenly, and Noah smiled without saying anything. After a while, he suggested she try carving a small design into a corner of the desk he had restored. Elena's fingers shook as she held the chisel. She was terrified of ruining the wood. Noah knelt beside her, guiding her hand for the first time in a tactile way that made her pulse quicken. The warmth of his hand brushing hers was brief but electric. Elena froze, unsure whether to pull away or trust the gentle pressure. Noah only kept his hand steady, letting her feel the rhythm rather than forcing the motion. "Relax," he murmured. "The wood will tell you what to do. You just listen." Elena nodded, taking a shaky breath, and began to follow the motion. Slowly, a simple vine formed along the corner of the desk. Each stroke required focus, And each time the chisel moved correctly, she felt a surge of accomplishment she had not felt in months. Noah remained beside her, his presence quiet but grounding. Every now and then, his fingers adjusted hers, and each touch left a soft imprint on her awareness she could not ignore. As the day wore on, the air between them shifted subtly. Elena caught herself stealing glances at him when he was absorbed in his own work. She noticed the way his shirt stretched slightly across his broad shoulders, and how his eyes crinkled when he smiled her. Small mistakes she made. The tension that had been coiled tight in her chest for weeks began to unwind, replaced with a tentative warmth that frightened and thrilled her all at once. Noah paused for a water break, and Elena leaned against the doorway, trying to act casual though her heart raced. He handed her a bottle without a word, and their fingers brushed. The contact was so fleeting, she almost convinced herself it had not happened, but the spark remained. Elena's thoughts spun. Could a man really be so gentle and patient, so attuned to another person's fear, without expecting something in return? Could she trust her heart again, even in small increments? She wiped her hands on a rag, suddenly aware of how close they were in the small room. Noah's eyes flicked toward her, not with judgment or expectation, but with a steady attentiveness that made her feel seen in ways she had stopped allowing herself to feel. For the first time since arriving back in town, she allowed herself to imagine that someone might care for her. Not because of who she was expected to be, but because of who she truly was. They worked in silence for several more hours. Elena traced patterns in the wood, and Noah restored another corner of the desk. Each movement, each careful stroke, became a quiet dialogue between them. At one point, she laughed softly when she nearly slipped with a chisel, and he leaned closer, just enough to steady her hand. Their eyes met, lingering for a moment that neither rushed to explain. That moment held more understanding than any words could. When the day ended and Noah began packing his tools, Elena felt an unusual reluctance. She wanted to linger, to feel the echo of the quiet closeness they had shared. She realized she had begun looking forward to these hours, to the simplicity of working side by side, to the gentle physical contact that was never pressured but never absent. Her chest felt full in a way that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. Before leaving, Noah turned to her and said quietly, "You're doing better than you think." Elena smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the day settle into a soft glow, rather than the sharp ache of anxiety. She said nothing, letting the affirmation linger between them. He left her with the quiet certainty that he would return, and for the first time in weeks, Elena felt a flutter of hope that rebuilding the house could also mean rebuilding herself. She stayed behind, tracing her fingers over the small vines she had carved. The lines were imperfect, but they were hers, and in that imperfection, she found a small, radiant sense of possibility. Chapter 7 The Heart Makes Demands. Next few days passed with a rhythm that felt almost comforting. Elena woke early, poured coffee, and met Noah at the house, where they worked quietly on sanding, patching, and restoring. Their interactions had grown natural, the initial awkwardness replaced by a subtle ease. Small touches, fleeting glances, and shared smiles had become part of the unspoken language between them. Yet despite the warmth that had begun to settle in her chest, Elena could feel an ease creeping in, quiet and insistent. Rumors began to spread almost immediately after neighbors saw Noah leaving with his tools. Elena noticed whispered comments as she walked down Maple Lane, averted gazes, and gentle nudges from friends who seemed both curious and protective. One afternoon, Mrs. Dawson leaned close over her fence, her voice a soft whisper. "He's quite taken with you, you know." Elena froze mid-step, unsure whether to laugh or panic. She smiled tightly and walked away, her stomach twisting with sudden vulnerability. Her life had been carefully compartmentalized for months. She had hidden grief, disappointment, and uncertainty. Now, with all eyes faintly on her, she felt exposed in ways she was not ready to handle. Inside the house, the unease followed her. Noah worked near the back room, sanding the window trim. While she prepared varnish for the desk, every sound of his movement, the way his sleeve brushed his forearm, the quiet hum of his presence, made her pulse thrum unpredictably. She reminded herself she was not allowed to feel this way. She had been hurt before, badly. Love had never been gentle in her past, and now she feared that even this something soft and steady would leave her fractured once again. During a pause, Elena tried to focus on her work. She dipped the brush into the varnish, but her hand shook slightly. Noah noticed but did not comment immediately. Instead, he moved closer with quiet patience and adjusted the brush in her hand, guiding her strokes over the wood. His fingers lingered just long enough to steady her, and she felt a warmth she could not ignore. Her heart raced, and she dropped her gaze to avoid his eyes. She tried to remind herself that she had been burned before, that even steady hands could leave. Later that day, gossip reached her ears more clearly. She overheard a friend at the market mentioning Noah's name, asking if they were an item now. The words felt invasive, prickling at her carefully constructed boundaries. Elena panicked. She could not manage the thought of the whole town scrutinizing her fragile attempt at happiness. She retreated inward, refusing calls, avoiding neighbors, and growing distant even with Noah. Noah sensed the shift immediately. He did not demand explanations or chase after her. He gave space, as he always had, standing in quiet patience when she withdrew. But Eleanor's heart ached at the separation she had imposed. She wanted to reach out, to confess the fear, to ask him to stay, but her pride and past heartbreaks held her back. Noah's gentleness became a mirror for her own hesitations, and the space between them stretched just enough to feel impossible. One evening, she found herself alone in the kitchen, scrubbing the counter with no real purpose. Memories of past betrayals flickered in her mind, mixing with the delicate sense of longing that Noah had stirred. She realized she feared another kind of disappointment, the possibility that letting someone in could you. And oh, her newly reclaimed courage, her chest tightened at the thought. She wanted love but feared its demands. Noah returned that evening, carrying a toolbox and a calm aura that always seemed to settle the house itself. Elena greeted him with a distant smile. Avoiding his eyes, he unpacked tools, observing the shift in her mood, but said nothing. Instead, he set about work methodically, moving through the rooms with steady purpose. Elena wanted to speak but could not. The silence between them became a quiet test of endurance, filled with tension that neither addressed directly. As Noah worked, Elena felt the ache of longing mixed with fear. She realized she wanted him to speak, to bridge the distance she had created, but she also dreaded revealing herself fully. Her heart demanded honesty, but her mind demanded protection. She could not reconcile the two, and the resulting tension left her restless, pacing through empty rooms, brushing hands over walls they had repaired together, as if tracing a path back to a time when she had not felt so vulnerable. By the end of the evening, Noah packed his tools again. He paused at the door and gave her a small, steady smile. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said softly. The words were simple, devoid of pressure, but they carried a weight Elena felt deep in her chest. She nodded, barely meeting his gaze, and watched him leave. After the truck disappeared down the lane, Elena sank onto the porch steps. The quiet settled around her, but the ache in her heart did not. She wanted love and yet feared it. She wanted connection and yet recoiled from the vulnerability it demanded. She realized that the heart made demands that logic and past wounds could not always answer. She exhaled shakily, knowing that in order to rebuild, she would have to confront more than just walls and floors. She would have to confront herself. And for the first time, she understood that Noah's gentle heart could challenge her own defenses in ways nothing else had before. Chapter 8. When she almost leaves again, City had been calling Eleanor 4 weeks before the offer arrived. The email sat in her inbox like a quiet echo, promising opportunity and validation she had long been chasing. It was a position at a company she had once dreamed of joining, one that could reopen doors she thought had closed forever. She reread the message 3 times, her pulse quickening with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The offer felt like proof that she could still succeed, but it also threatened to undo the fragile stability she had begun to build in her hometown. Eleanor spent the morning pacing the rooms of her grandmother's house, running her hands over freshly sanded wood and varnished furniture. Each polished surface reflected her uncertainty back at her. The work she and Noah had done together had created a sense of accomplishment she had not expected to feel again. Every corner of the house carried pieces of her effort, pieces of her courage, and a slow, steady sense of belonging that had begun to take root. Yet the email pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat she could not ignore. She hesitated to call Noah. She feared that speaking aloud would make the decision real, would force a confrontation she did not know how to manage. Instead, she carried the letter in her bag, rereading it quietly while sanding the study desk. The wood felt smooth beneath her fingers, grounding her in the present. But her mind wandered to the life she could return to in the city. The thought of leaving stirred a tight knot of fear in her chest, the same fear that had made her retreat before. When Noah arrived, he greeted her with his usual quiet calm. He set his toolbox down and glanced at the desk they had been working on. His eyes lingered briefly on her hands, streaked with varnish, and then he smiled softly. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. She wanted to tell him, to share the news, but the words caught in her throat. She could not risk the pain of his disappointment, nor could she bear the thought of revealing how easily she might leave again. They worked together, sanding and shaping, and for a while, Eleanor focused on the task at hand, letting the tactile motion occupy her mind. The sun slanted through the windows, dust floating like golden threads around them. Noah's presence was steady and warm, a quiet anchor in the swirl of emotions she had been trying to suppress. She watched his hands move, watched the careful precision with which he worked, and wondered how someone could be so gentle while carrying so much grief. By afternoon, Eleanor could no longer ignore the reality of her decision. She stepped onto the porch, the letter clutched in her hand. The wind brushed against her cheeks as she read and reread the lines. She imagined her life back in the city, the meetings, the achievements, the people who would not know the fragility she carried beneath her smile. Then she looked at the house she had begun to restore, the floors they had sanded together, the walls they had rebuilt, and the man whose quiet steadiness had begun to mend her heart. Noah appeared behind her on the porch without a sound. He did not ask about the letter. He did not pressure her to speak. He simply handed her a bottle of water and leaned against the railing, watching her with an expression that was patient but perceptive. Eleanor's chest tightened. She wanted to confide in him, to tell him everything, but the fear of causing pain and the fear of losing her fragile sense of belonging kept the words locked away. Later that evening, she packed her bag quietly, while Noah rested in the living room, unaware of the storm of thoughts in her mind. Every item she folded felt heavier than it should. She hesitated at the door, hand on the doorknob, imagining the weight of goodbye. She pictured the freshly varnished desk, the sanded floorboards, and the quiet strength in Noah's eyes. She realized she was not leaving just a house behind. She was leaving a part of herself, a part that had begun to heal, a part that had learned to trust again. Noah eventually came to the doorway of her room, his presence calm and steady. Eleanor turned to him, the letter still clutched tightly in her hand. Her voice caught when she tried to speak. Noah did not need her to explain. He did not beg. He simply nodded toward the bag, understanding her fear without judgment. His gentleness demanded nothing, and in that, She found herself torn between two futures. As she stepped onto the porch with her bag, she glanced around the house one last time. The walls gleamed softly under the evening light. The furniture carried their marks of labor and care, and the spaces felt alive with memories, both old and newly made. The weight of leaving pressed against her chest, but so did a strange warmth. She realized that no matter where she went, a part of her would remain here, in the quiet rooms, in the steady presence of someone who had begun to teach her that healing was possible. Elena paused at the edge of the porch, hand resting lightly on the railing. She looked back toward the living room, where Noah had settled quietly with his tools. The pull of her heart toward him, toward the life they could build together, was undeniable, but she also felt the call of the city, of ambition, of proving herself to a world that had doubted her. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and for the first time acknowledged that the choice she faced was not about fear or opportunity alone. It was about trusting herself to follow the path that truly mattered. She stepped back inside, her bag still at her side, and met Noah's gaze. In that quiet moment, the weight of decision settled into a fragile balance. She could leave, but she also realized that perhaps the home they had built together, the trust they had cultivated, and the gentle heart that had met her own might be what she truly needed to stay. Chapter 9. The home he built for her. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the rooms with a gentle gold that highlighted the smooth surfaces of freshly sanded wood and the warm hues of varnished furniture. Elena stepped into the house, her bag left by the door, and paused in the living room. The air smelled faintly of cedar and polish, carrying the quiet evidence of hours spent repairing, restoring, and caring for the home. Every corner, every surface, bore the mark of Noah's hands and her own, and the weight of it settled in her chest with a strange combination of awe and apprehension. She walked through the room slowly, letting her fingers brush over the edges of the freshly patched walls. The study desk with its delicate carved vine, and the bed frame in her grandmother's room that now gleamed under the soft light. Each touch carried memory, effort, and presence. She realized that she was walking through more than a renovated house. She was walking through a space that reflected her own journey of recovery. Her tentative steps back toward trust, patience, and hope. Noah was in the kitchen, putting away his tools. He looked up as she entered, offering a small, steady smile that immediately calmed the fluttering in her chest. She hesitated, words caught between relief, gratitude, and an unfamiliar surge of something more, something tender and undeniable. She wanted to speak, to articulate the storm of emotion he had stirred in her, but no words seemed adequate. He watched her move through the rooms without interruption, allowing her to absorb the transformation in her own time. When she finally reached the study, she knelt to trace the carved vine they had created together. The wood was smooth beneath her fingertips, and she felt the deliberate care that had gone into every detail. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a slow, deep breath, as if inhaling the promise of stability, of belonging, of something more than fleeting happiness. Elena turned to him, her voice trembling slightly. "Noah, you've done more than fix a house." He nodded, a quiet understanding in his gaze. "I wanted to restore it, yes, but more than that, I wanted it to feel like home for you. I hoped it could be a place where you could start over, safely." She swallowed hard, the words she had buried rising like tides. "You've restored me too, in ways I didn't know I needed." Noah stepped closer, his movements unhurried but deliberate. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and Elena felt a warmth bloom in her chest that she could no longer ignore. The tension, fear, and hesitation that had bound her for weeks seemed to loosen in his presence. She realized that the home he had built for her was not just walls and wood. It was patience, kindness, and the courage to let herself trust again. He spoke softly, leaning just enough to meet her eyes. "I can't fix everything you've been through, Elena, But I can be here. I can stay steady while you rebuild yourself. And I'll wait for you to let me in, fully, when you're ready. Tears pricked at her eyes, not from sorrow, but from relief. She had spent months avoiding vulnerability, guarding her heart against disappointment and fear. And yet here he was, offering himself gently, unwavering, and without demand. Elena realized that love did not always have to hurt. Sometimes it healed. She took a tentative step closer, letting her hands brush against his. I don't want to leave this behind, she whispered, not the house. Not you. I don't want to run anymore. Noah's smile deepened, warmth radiating in every subtle line of his face. Then stay. Let's keep building together. Not just the house, but us. Eleanor's heart swelled with an unfamiliar certainty. The decision that had once seemed so terrifying now felt inevitable. She had run from love before, from opportunities, from herself, but standing here, amidst the home they had restored together, she understood that choosing to stay was not a surrender. It was a reclaiming of her strength, her hope, and her heart. They moved through the house together, hands brushing, words sparse but meaningful. Every room they had touched became a testament to their shared effort, patience, and trust. Each repaired corner mirrored the careful rebuilding of Eleanor's own heart. She understood, finally, that Noah had given her more than a restored home. He had given her a place where she could be whole. A place where she could love without fear. Standing in the living room, she met his gaze fully, letting the vulnerability she had hidden for months surface. I choose this, she said, her voice steady now. I choose you. I choose home. Noah reached for her hands, holding them gently. And I choose you too, he said, every day, if you'll let me. Eleanor nodded, a smile breaking across her face for the first time in what felt like forever. The house, the work, the quiet care, it had all led to this moment. In the warmth of morning light and the presence of a man who had quietly mended what was broken, she realized that home was not a place. Home was a feeling, and she had finally found it. The house stood as a symbol of their shared labor and trust, a testament to patience, resilience, and love. And for the first time, Eleanor believed that some things were worth holding onto forever. Chapter 10 To Hearts. One home. Morning air carried a crispness that hinted at winter's approach. But inside the house, warmth lingered from the radiance of sunlit rooms and the comfort of shared effort. Eleanor moved through the spaces, now fully alive with the touch of care and restoration. Each room told a story of healing: the study with its carved desk corner, the bedroom with its polished bed frame, and the living room with its walls that seemed to hum quietly under layers of renewed paint. She ran her hand along the smooth surface of the banister and felt a connection, not just to the home, but to the man who had helped her rebuild it piece by piece. Noah entered the kitchen with his usual calm, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked from the edge of town. He handed them to her with a shy smile that seemed to radiate patience, kindness, and quiet pride. Eleanor took the flowers and set them in a vase, the bright colors a contrast to the soft woods and warm light around them. She realized that the house, once neglected and broken, now mirrored her own journey, stronger, steadier, and ready for new growth. They moved seamlessly into the day, tidying the final tools, adjusting small details, and laughing quietly at minor mishaps. Eleanor felt a lightness she had not experienced in years. The fear that had once shadowed every thought, every step, seemed to have loosened, replaced by trust and a growing certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Noah's presence was steady but unintrusive, a gentle reminder that love did not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrived quietly, persistently, and completely. At midday, they paused on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the sunlight dance across the freshly sanded floors. Eleanor leaned against the railing and let herself breathe deeply, noticing how the scent of the polished wood mixed with the cool air. Noah joined her silently, hands tucked into his pockets. Neither spoke immediately. Words felt unnecessary because their hearts had already communicated in subtle glances, shared touches, and the collective memory of work done together. Finally, Elena spoke, her voice soft but sure. "This house, it's more than walls and floors. It's proof that things can be fixed, that people can heal." Noah looked at her, eyes steady, and nodded. "It's not just the house. You've built yourself too, Elena. Every day you show up. Every time you try. Every small step forward, it's all part of it." Her chest swelled with gratitude and something deeper, something she had resisted for so long. She realized that this steady man, who had quietly held space for her grief and her fears, had become her anchor. The thought made her heart quicken and settle at the same time. Elena stepped closer, brushing a hand against his arm. The gesture was electric and tender, a bridge between patience and desire. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I want to keep building with you." Noah smiled, a slow, steady smile that reached his eyes and softened the tension she had carried for so long. "And I want that too. Every day, if you'll let me." The decision hung in the sunlight. Unspoken but mutual. There was no rush, no drama, just the quiet certainty that comes from trust, shared effort, and hearts willing to open again. They walked through the house together, hands brushing, smiles exchanged, and laughter filling corners that had once been empty and still. As evening approached, they settled on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket against the cool air. Elena rested her head lightly on Noah's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath hers. The house, with all its restored rooms and polished surfaces, was no longer merely a home. It was a symbol of resilience, of patience, and of love nurtured gently over time. Elena realized that in rebuilding the house, they had rebuilt each other as well. The cracks in her heart, once jagged and sharp, had softened under care and attention, leaving spaces where hope, trust, and affection could flourish. Noah's gentle presence had not erased her past, but it had allowed her to embrace it, to heal, and to move forward with confidence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Elena and Noah sat quietly, savoring the peace and warmth of the life they were beginning together. The house, the labor, the small victories, and the tender moments had culminated in this singular truth. Home is not just a place, it is where hearts find safety, understanding, and love. And for Elena, that home had always been Noah. Two hearts, once tentative and cautious, now beat together in harmony. Two hearts, once guarded and wounded, now shared a space built on trust, patience, and care. Two hearts, one home, and the promise of countless days filled with quiet warmth, laughter, and love that would endure beyond the walls they had restored together. For the first time in a long time, Elena felt complete, and she knew, without doubt, that this was only the beginning of a life she could finally embrace fully, gently, and with joy.